Stay on the beach, the place to be. All the tips and ways to make the first.
Hola. Fortunately, that's the only German you're gonna get, Spanish you're gonna get from me today. Maybe that and dos cervezas, por favor, but that's the limit. But I'm super excited to talk to you now for the next 20 minutes about MVP thinking in a changing search environment. Little bit of an intro of myself first. If you don't know me, I am Vanda Pókecz, head of SEO and product lead at Atolls, also a certified digital product manager and co-host of the SEO Product Unveiled podcast. And I love to go to events, admittingly not only just for the great insights, but also to meet people like yourselves. So please excuse me for my lack of Spanish and come say hi later, nevertheless. And I was super excited when I was asked to speak here at SEO on the Beach because, you know, it's not just for the great opportunity, but because I just love this topic, right? If you know me, you know that my talks is a little bit different, usually a little bit maybe inspirational in nature. However, this time I thought, why not bring something different? And that is because I had to think whether we're actually the right fit for each other. You know, my talks usually lack this data angle, which otherwise I find great, but then I wanted to bring this together. So in the next couple of minutes, you can expect to hear about transitioning into an MVP mindset, experimentation, and sort of unusual data for SEO. And I also brought an example with me, which I will walk you through today. So back in the days when I started to interact more closely with product teams, I recognized one thing, and that was that they were not so afraid to launch things which weren't perfect. In some cases, maybe even preferred it, which was super weird for my little perfectionist brain, and quite a mindset shift from the one that I had at the time, right? Where in SEO we would sometimes spend weeks on planning, aligning, auditing, just to wait even longer to actually see things implemented. And this is where I came across the concept of a minimum viable product, right? Which refers to the smallest possible version of a product or feature which you can launch, and it brings value, and very importantly, it allows you to learn. Of course, not just to launch for the sake of launching, but to actually test assumptions, hypotheses, and allow you to gain early feedback and reduce your risk. And very importantly, it's also super helpful, right, if you can get that early data just to back your arguments and push for some more resources. So if we want to go through a couple of examples, we first need to ask ourselves the question, what is the smallest possible change that I can make which helps me learn whether a bigger idea is worth pursuing? Whether that is testing structured data on only one template instead of many, or testing out the support of LLMs along our content creation process, right? But only on one single module, maybe an FAQ, and only on a small number of pages. Or it could even be about building a very basic way of testing something new, right? To monitor that, track it, instead of straight away launching in with the tooling and automation. That said, MVPs do not mean low quality, right? They mean just the right size for learning, and they can be extremely helpful also for us SEOs, because if we want to be honest with ourselves, right, our work doesn't always get the benefit of the doubt. So an MVP can help us answer the question of whether something is worth scaling, and we can answer that with data, not only speculation. So the mindset shift I would like to encourage today is less perfect plans and sort of more scrappy starts, right? Because the goal is not to straight away launch an entire system. The goal is just to put enough life to learn something useful. So once we embrace that MVP thinking, right, this mindset, the next question, of course, becomes, how do you know what to test? And importantly, how do you measure that it's actually working? So in SEO, we tend to rely on the same type of data over and over again, right? Which all is good and useful. However, it is also often quite reactive. It tells us what has been happening after something has already been launched. Now, in product-led environment, the best experiments sometimes start even earlier, at the phase of discovery, where the team kind of comes together and collects insights about things like user behavior, preferences, search intent, and even identifying friction points before they actually decide what to build. And we SEOs need more of that. We need to get curious earlier, right? Not just what Google wants, but what is the user actually trying to do here? What result would help them? And why might they click something else instead of clicking on our results, right? So let's go through a couple of sort of maybe unconventional for SEOs, but useful discovery tools that we could utilize along, gathering these insights and backing our MVPs. So we could run some user testing, right? A couple of years back, still in another job, we actually did this in a sort of guerrilla format. So we went around a big office building, stopped random people and asked them, please go to Google and search for something that you've been wanting to buy for the past couple of weeks. And then we just observed and asked them follow-up questions like, why did you click that instead of something else? Of course, then going a little bit deeper as well. You would be really surprised that even by asking such simple but open questions can really bring some great insights. So 2 tips at this stage. One, if you're looking for your next team day for a fun sort of activity that helps your team to come out of their comfort zone and actually start talking to human people, right? Then this is great. And the second tip, if I was doing this today, I would do it a little bit differently. I'm sure you will understand why. I would not tell that person to go to Google and search for something, right? Because I'm robbing myself from an opportunity right there. I would just ask them, search for something, right? And then observe, are they going to Google, another search engine, a social media platform, maybe an AI engine, right? And already gain that information. And then I can kind of double down on the channel I'm most interested in. We can also start looking inwards, right? Internal search data, talking with our customer support teams, or looking at their tickets and so on. So this can already give us some good clues as well. Or we could utilize tools and methods which otherwise other teams are using, right? For conversion rate optimization, maybe for UX, Heatmaps, scroll tracking can also be very helpful for us SEOs because it allows us to kind of visually understand how people interact, right, with our content. So we can maybe make a change to our content, right, and see, are they scrolling right through it, or are they actually clicking on some buttons, engaging? But it can also be very helpful for sort of components which otherwise don't have a direct engagement element associated with it, right? So it doesn't have a button or link to click through. It actually is just static content, maybe. And of course, we can also run some small-scale content experiments, right? Whether that's A/B testing, which I generally tend to favor because, of course, it reduces that external factor impact, or we can just go with the observational testing, right? Looking at our metrics, key metrics, right before and after a change was made. I guess this is something we're all a little bit more familiar with, but of course, it does need a proper test design as well. So let's just imagine, going back to the FAQ example, we want to put some FAQs on our page, right? Maybe because of best practice or because competitors do it, but we do not have a widget, let's say, to put this type of content on our page. What we could do, if we have other opportunities to bring content to that page, is to just simply structure it in this question and answer format. Okay, yes, it doesn't have a schema, it doesn't have a perfect UX, but maybe it already gives us some sort of directional signals which can then help us to push for more resources and build our MVP. So the message here is that before you build, make sure to test your problem, and before you scale, test that solution. But I promise you an example, so I guess this is my time now to deliver. Little disclaimer, as the title already suggests. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about a new shiny feature. I'm actually going to double down on the monitoring process. And that's because we're here, right, at the data edition of SEO on the beach, and my firm belief is that the best data work, right, is not necessarily that final product, that report or dashboard that we deliver, but what we learn and how we get there. So let's rewind to 2024 when something happened that I guess I don't need to introduce to any of you. AI overviews were launched in the US first, then more English-speaking markets, and more recently they are also here in Europe, in Spain as well, since I believe March, right? And we were faced with something a little bit different than we were used to. AI-generated answers on top of the SERPs, largely for more informational queries, but also creeping in otherwise. And often, of course, not giving that need to the user to click out to other websites, even if citations were directly there, right? However, what we didn't have, and up to this day we're still a little bit in the dark on, our tools were not ready for this, right? Search Console is still not giving us much. It became more difficult to understand things like the impact on CTR, and third-party tracking tools were also, just not ready for it at the beginning. So if we were based in Europe, like I guess most of you are, right, me as well, but good luck for us. I'm going to give a little shout out here to Lily Ray, who actually pointed it out in her, I guess it was on X maybe, or LinkedIn. On the summer of 2024, when she was checking from Europe with a VPN, she could actually observe less AI overviews showing up when actually checking from the US, right? So let's just say that we were flying a little bit blind, and SEOs were faced with a different kind of challenge. How do you actually measure something that you can barely see? And importantly, how do you know that it's actually impacting your business critical queries? And of course, how do you attribute that to the actual impact on your business, right? This is where MVP thinking became essential. Instead of waiting around for a perfect solution, for a custom dashboard, we had to start small, fast, and very much imperfect, but we were focusing on value, right? We wanted to understand, or at least estimate, what kind of impact we can expect on our business. So let me walk you through this MVP monitoring journey. First, in the early days, I'm sure as most of you, we just started with some research, right? Listening to industry news, chatter, trying to understand what was going on. But at the same time, we also decided to do a small-scale test. So we just picked out our top 50 queries, and we started to manually monitor. So we answered questions like whether AI answers were actually showing up, whether our domains were cited within, or what kind of domains. And did the summaries even make sense for the type of queries that we were actually interested in, right? And as our tools started to roll out sort of beta features, we also layered them in, right? But first, before that, we actually wanted to get a bit more systematic, right? I got a bit ahead of myself. There's the number of steps. We actually set up a manual tracking template, right, and answered very similar questions. And in the second version was when we actually moved on to the tools, right? Tools like Ahrefs, SEMrush, Keyword.com. I am in no way affiliated with these tools apart from them already being in our tool stack. So a little tip here, of course, that I know there are a lot of shiny tools out there these days. Some of them I'm sure are really great. But you can also first look at what you have at your disposal, right, and whether that fits your needs. But we still continued with the manual checks because we had to validate how sort of correct, let's say, these tools were, right? And I have to say it took a little bit of time. Of course, understandably, these were mostly starting out as beta features. But we could already start asking ourselves bigger questions, like what share of our top track queries showed AI overviews? How often were we cited within? What was the search volume share of AIO triggering keywords compared to the total? And even things like what was the word count spread. So as you can see, we really tried to approach it from various angles. And one thing became clear, an increasing trend month over month, and not only for informational queries. So this is where we wanted to reduce our time a little bit, spending on data collection, right? And instead focus on trying to understand patterns, maybe the more qualitative aspect. So we introduced some formulas, but to be honest with you, this version 3 actually didn't take very long. Before this MVP approach kind of, really helped us, and we got more resources. So this is where we got some data support. We started integrating APIs and basically built out a dashboard which could now scale to our many, many domains and could be a sort of more live system. And this is, for me, the beauty of MVP thinking, for us SEOs as well. Because sure, there was external pressure on this topic, which helps. And yes, there's a lot of secondary research out there right now. And kudos to those teams who really dig into it. It's really helpful. However, if you want to understand your business, right, your industry, your domains, you cannot just look outwards. Sometimes the only way to get real relevant data for us is to get our hands a little bit dirty. So let's zoom out for a second. At the beginning, I started this talk with a mindset shift, right? And part of that is that SEO doesn't always need to be big, complex, and perfectly packaged to drive value. Sometimes the best thing we can actually do is just to start a little bit smaller and faster, of course. I hope by now we're all aligned on that MVPs are not shortcuts. They are, in fact, learning tools and can be extremely helpful in giving us faster feedback, reducing our risk, and allowing us to move forward, even if we don't have all the answers yet. Also, SEOs need to get a little bit more curious, a little bit more early. We need more experimentation. But we don't need the perfect tool to start monitoring. This IKAUE monitoring journey I brought you on today truly started out manually with a VPN in a spreadsheet, but it allowed us to gain those initial insights, which could then give us those resources we needed to really build this reliable system. And finally, data doesn't always mean dashboards, right? It can be anything from screenshots, maybe directional signals, or like manual notes. What truly matters is how you use that data to make better decisions and how you use it to tell a story that others will care about. So the landscape keeps changing. In SEO and beyond, we really cannot sit around waiting for perfect conditions. Instead, let me challenge you today. What's one thing you've been waiting to build? Or to test out, right? What could you build this week? Not to launch perfectly, but just to learn. Start there, build your MVP, and let your data do the talking. Thank you. I know, I finished on time. I didn't give you enough pressure here. Thanks.